Hey everybody, good morning. All right, so let's now start with yes. See, we have taken a few of examples to understand how we can design a query which would going to return some of the records from the objects, and I have given you few examples as well. So if you might have solved these examples, so probably would have understand how we can design a query, an SQL query which could fetch data from the object directly from the database directly. Now see, there would be two different programming scenarios on which we have to have a discussions because ultimately, you know, we would going to use this query inside our program. Inside the programs, what we are going to design, the Apex program, the classes, the methods, what we would be constructing, we would be going to use the SQL query inside that. Now, for your practice purpose, it was all good, like, you can fire the query over here and you can see what is the outcome of that query. So that was perfect. And there's no issue into that. You can directly fire a query over inside Salesforce Inspector, and then we could get the result. But that is just a demonstration. That is just a demonstration, like how you can fire a query. But in the actual programming, we would be going to use the query. So there would be two scenarios on which we have to talk and we have to know. So first one of them is what happens if your query would return you only one record, right? Sometimes this could happen. Like, for example, you're going to learn something called as a limit class. Limit. See, if I would not give a limit class and I have to assign a query like select ID, name, rating, and facts, and all these columns, all these fields from the account, and if I would fire a query in this case, so this is going to return me all those records, right? And there are multiple records. Like I can see there are 138 records that this query has returned me, and this query has fetched, this query has grabbed all of 138 records. But let's say if I wanted only one of them. So I could introduce a class called as limit. You're going to learn this. And I have not started classes yet, but yeah, you could understand. So there's a class called as limit. When you say the limit and after limit, you always have to give an integer number. After limit, you always have to give an integer number. So for example, I have restricted that I just wanted to see one record, right? So I have inserted like limit equals to 1, and then now if I would export, so it would going to pick up a random record, but that would be only one record out of that 138 records of this object. So basically, there could be two different scenarios. There could be two different scenarios. When your query would return only a single record, and when your query would return the multiple records. So how we are going to handle this? How we are going to handle this? So basically what happens is like, let me try to show you that. I would design a class for this. So I'll do one thing. I'll take you to the developer. So, and I would create a class for that. I'll create a class for that. So let me close out everything out of here, and I'm creating a new Apex class. I'll be creating a new Apex class. Let's say the name would be database helper class. I guess we don't have a class with the same name. So I have created a class, right? I have created a class. Now let me create a method inside that. So I would be creating a method like public static void, and let me give a name, maybe like get all account records. So this is my method, which I have created inside a class. Now I'm going to present you two separate scenarios over here. So what would happen if my query would return me only one record? Let's say I'm designing a query. Now see, I have told you that there are two different forms of queries, static query and dynamic. There are two different forms of SOQLs, static SOQL and dynamic SOQL. But moreover, if you are writing a static query, you always have to enclose it within this square brackets. Whereas if you are writing a dynamic query, you always have to write it inside single inverted single quotes. So we would going to see what is a dynamic query, and definitely we're going to work on that as well. But right now, we are learning how to write down the static query. Right now, we are learning static queries. By yesterday itself, I have told you, like, see, although you're writing a query inside Salesforce Inspector, over here, you don't have to mention it. You don't have to enclose it like this over here. You don't have to do. And by the way, if you try to do, I guess Salesforce Inspector would going to give an error called as unexpected token. I'm not expecting you to write down the queries inside your square brackets, right? So, but when you write it inside a program, that time you have to maintain with this rule that if you're writing a static query, you always have to write it inside what? Inside a square bracket. So see, I would be writing a query over here, right? And better I just copy it from this. I'll just copy it from this. So I have copied this query and I'm going to paste it out over here. So this is my query, this is my query. This is my query. And I'm absolutely sure about one thing, that this query is going to return me only one. This query would return me one. So if the query is returning you only one record, you have to store it. See, we always require to catch. We always require to define something which could catch, which could store the result, what the query is returning. You can see that we are getting one error over here, right? You can see that there's no error. There's nothing wrong with this query. It's not like I have splitted this into two lines and that is the reason it's giving me the error. No, it's not like that. Don't think like that. This error is coming up because we have defined the query. My query is absolutely right. There's no error. There's no mistake into that. But still we are looking that we have one error. Now this error is because we have not defined, listen this carefully, we have not defined the return type of this query. Like if this query is going to be executed, the data, the result, what is coming out, like this record or any record, we have not defined where this record is going to be get stored. So that must always be defined. Let me show you what is the error we have, what is the message. What is the message that we get in this case? So if you go with the problems tab, you can see expression cannot be a statement. Expression cannot be a statement. But that is not a clear message. But you'll have to understand it. In some of the cases, you don't understand what the error message is trying to convince. But yeah, so this is the error what you get. Expression cannot be a statement. This is an expression. This is not a statement. Now, what is the difference in programming language? In programming language, let me try to make it more clear to every one of you. What it is saying, expression cannot be a statement. Here, what is expected is an expression. And what you have written looks like to be a statement. Now, what is the difference between an expression and a statement? Expressions always return something. Like I'll tell you, I'll give you one simple example. If there is a mathematical expression 2 plus 3, this is an expression. What is going to be the result of that? 2 plus 3 is 5. 5 multiplied by 5, that's an expression. What is going to be the result of that? 25, isn't it? So expressions always return something. Expressions always return something. Statement is not. Statement is just to convey something, right? Today, the atmosphere is very hot. Yesterday, even it was very hot. And when I was in Hyderabad, it was literally worse. These all are statements. These all are statements. I'm just trying to convey something. I'm just trying to say something. I'm just trying to convey you a message. So that's a statement. So this is what I to understand. Expressions cannot be a statement. Here, expression is expected, not a statement. What you have written seems that it is not returning something. So it is not allowed. That's how you have to decode your error messages. Anyways, so because this query would return me one record of account. This query would return me one record of account. As you can see, a record, right? If you would make a click over here, and when you go to view in Salesforce, you are going to look that this is that record. This is one of the record. It's a record of account that query has picked and returned it back to you. So when you're sure about this, let your query is returning you only one record. Your query is returning only one record. What you have to do, how you'll collect that result. So you would have to define one variable. Listen this carefully, market. You have to define a variable of that particular object. You have to define a variable of that particular object. It is something same like if I would ask you, see, if I would ask you to store one integer value, tell me what you are going to do in that case. If I would ask you to store, let's say, one integer value, what you are going to do? You would obviously going to define an integer variable like integer num equals to 10, right? If I would say to you that you have to store one string value, tell me what you are going to do in that case. You would obviously going to define a string variable, string name equals to not like that, but actually like that, right? If I would tell you that you'll have to store, let's say, an ID, what you're going to do? You're going to define an ID variable, ID, the name called as record ID equals to some values, something like that. So basically, similarly, if I would tell you, like, if you have to store one account variable, one account record, one case record, one contact record, you're obviously going to define one variable, like, for example, account ACC equals to some value. If I would say you that you'll have to store one case record, you will going to define one case variable. If I would say you like you'll have to store one contact record, you're going to define a contact variable, something like this, right? Because we know one thing, we have studied data types. We have studied data types long back in the beginning. We have studied data types. In Salesforce Apex programming, there are two different forms of data types, primitive and S object. Although we have not studied S object for yet, but yeah, even in the primitive itself, object is a data type. Primitive itself, object is a data type. So like your integer string ID, date, time, boolean, object itself is a data type. Object itself is a data type. All right. So if you could define an integer variable, similarly, you could also define an account variable. You could also define a contact variable. You could also define an opportunity variable, hiring manager variable, candidate variable. Because object itself is a data type in Apex program. Object itself is a data type, isn't it? Object itself, and it's a primitive data type, by the way. By the way, it's a primitive data type itself. It's not S object. S object is something else. Don't make yourself confused with these two terminologies. I have not shown you the use of S object. So for now, for a time being, you can ignore the second data type. So in primitive itself, you have this option as an object. All right. So now let's understand. So I'll take you back to the program. So because this query whenever compiler would going to execute this query, we are sure that this query would return only one record. Why? Because I have used limit clause over here, right? I'm going to talk on the both scenario, but let's now first understand what happens when your query would return only one record. So whenever a query would return only one record, you have to collect it inside a variable of that object. This query we have designed, we have fired this query on account. So what record, or rather which type of record it is going to return? It's going to return me an account record, obviously. It's not going to be happen like you fire the query on account and you get a result of contact. No, it's not possible. It's not possible, right? Whatever the name from, after from whatever the name of the object you have given, the query would be fired only on that object, and it's going to return you the records of the same object. It's not never possible. So this is not going to be happen. In any case that you design the query on account, you're going to receive opportunity or some other object record. It's not going to be happen. So we are sure about one thing, rather two things, that at first, like, this query is returning the one record, only one record, because I have used limit clause. And that record is of type of account. So what I'm going to do, I would be defining an account variable. Let's say account ACC equals to like this. Account ACC equals. Now you can split static queries into two parts, but you cannot do this with a dynamic. You're going to see there's difference later on. But if the query is static query, if the query is enclosed within square brackets, it's a static query. You can split it into multiple lines like I just have done, right? Compiler would accept it. But if it's a dynamic query, you cannot have this privilege over there. If you try to do that, you'll have to make certain more adjustments that we are going to talk later on. But right now, yes, you can split your static queries into multiple lines like this. So this query would return me, this query, and see the error is gone. The error is gone, right? This query would return me a single record. Now, if I wanted to see what record has been given, I could definitely break it out. System.debug account record equals to, let me concatenate the value of ACC over here. So try to save this program and let's now execute this. So let's go to, what is the name of my class? The name of the class is database helper dot get all account records, right? And let's now execute this. So what I'm expecting in this case, I'm expecting one account record. So I'll go with debug only, and you can see one account record. This one has been fetched. All right. So this is what if your query would return you only a single record. Now, what happens when your query would return you multiple records? All right. What happens when your query would return you multiple records? Let's try to understand that as well. So if my query would return me multiple records, right? So I'm going to comment out all these lines. I would be commenting out everything out of over here. Let me take you to the next line. Yeah. So if my query is returning me multiple records, right? Let me take the same query, but I'm going to remove, I would be going to remove the limit clause from here, right? I am not giving a limit clause, not giving a limit clause. So I can have this. I'm not going to give the limit clause. So if I won't give the limit clause, right? If I would not give the limit clause, you can simply see what is going to be happen in that case. So if I have removed the limit clause, so this query would pick out everything, right? There's no limit. It would simply fetch every record from that object. It's not going to make any choice. It would just pick up everything, whatever is inside the object. So how many records are there? There are about 138 records. So this query is definitely to give me multiple records, right? And see, once again, we have the error. Same error it would be. Expression cannot be the statement. Expression cannot be the statement. Understood? All right. So now what if the query is returning? Now see, even though if you would try to define a variable and you try to store, if you would try to store all multiple records, but in the same variable, it's not going to be happen. again you're going to see the error. Let me try to show you that as well. So even though if I would try to save it, I'm going to get an error, right? What? Let me try to show that. So system.query expression list has more than one rows of assignment. So maybe from here, maybe from here, it the compiler won't recognize any error because syntactically it is okay. Syntactically it is all good. Syntactically query must have a return type, and you can see a return type. So compiler has passed it. According to compiler, syntactically it is true. But then you have faced the error during runtime, right? You have faced the error during runtime. During runtime, when the query was executed, query has returned almost 138 records, and you are trying to store them in a single variable. That is the error. And this error has been generated in the runtime. All runtime errors, they are called as exceptions. The runtime errors are called as exceptions. The runtime errors, the errors that generated on runtime in programming language, they are usually called as exceptions. All right. So what would happen? See, we are talking about these two scenarios, and you have to understand, because in the coming days, you are going to make a use of queries a lot of the time. A lot of the time in your program, you are going to make the use of queries. I guess if in more than the 80% of the possibilities, if you are, for example, if you are constructing 100 programs, so out of those hundreds, it's possible that in 80 of them, 85 of them, 90% of the program, you are going to make a use of query. And that's why you'll have to always understand, like, query must always have a return type, right? So if the query is returning you multiple records, more than one records, you cannot store it inside the variable. You always would require a list collection. For that. There are three different forms of collections we have learned: list, set, and map. List and sets, there are so many similarities, and there are a few differences as well. Map is entirely a different concept. So I have to, whenever my query would return a multiple record, you always would require to collect it inside a list collection. So see, I'm defining a list collection, let's say LST accounts. I'm defining a list collection, LST accounts, right? Now, if I would try to run it, or rather, let me try to write down more coding of this, and then I'm going to execute. So this is something, is very important to understand. Whenever you are designing a query and you are sure about one thing, that query would return more than one record, even though if it would return you 2 records, 3 records, you always would have to collect it inside the list collection. And by the way, you can write it down somewhere. I guess this is not written in notes. Let me verify. I guess this is not written in the notes, but you would have to. Yes, it is there. See this sentence. The default return type of any SQL query is always a list collection. The default return type of this is the default return type. Let me make certain changes. The default return type of any SQL query is always a list collection. Always a list collection, right? This is very important. This is something you should always remember. And they might ask you this in the interview. what is the default return type of an SQL query? So whenever a SQL query is executed, the default return type is always a list collection. The default return type is always a list collection, right? So this is the way, this is the way to, if your query is returning you multiple records, you always have to collect it. You always have to store it inside a list collection. And because there are multiple records of account, my query is designed on account. So I'm sure that query would always return multiple records of account. So I have defined a list of account. For example, if this query was designed on contact, let's say if this query was designed on contact, you will have to define list of contact over here with some name. Right. So this is what, let me go further and try to execute few more things. For example, now I have I have everything inside this collection, right, with this name. So let's say if I wanted to see the size, I mean, how many records, so how many records have been fetched. So I can go with system.debug. I can go with system.debug, and let's say the size of the collection, right? Size of the collection means how many records are there, equals to, I can take use of a method. There is a method called as size, right? There's a method called as size. With every collection, this method can be used. So I can execute this and I can see the latest result. So see, the collection size is 138. Now you can definitely print that. I mean, if you wanted to print every record out of here, you can directly make a use of enhanced for loop. You know how to do that. I can, if for example, if I wanted to print every record, all 138 records, right? What I can do, I can make a use of enhanced for loop. So enhanced for loop is always having two partitions. On the right hand side, you have to mention the name of that collection from where you need to fetch the records. On the left hand side, you have to mention the data type of every record, because every record inside this is an account. So I can definitely print it like the system.debug, the account record equals to plus ACC. That's it. Right, that's it. So this would going to show me every record, but in every new line. So if I would execute this now, it can definitely show me all of the records one by one. See, these are the records, all 138 records, by the way. All right. And now let me try to show you something. I mean, related to governor limits, right? We have studied that in a program we could maximum execute 100 SQL queries, right? So see the governor limit. Number of SQL queries that you have used in this program is 100. So you can maximum execute, you can maximum use 100 SQL queries in a program, not more than that. And then SQL queries, if a single query could return you 50,000 records, you have fetched 138 records exactly. So that is that's the place where you can see the governor limits and everything. All right. So these are two important scenarios, guys. You should always know before you can use SQL queries in the program. So whenever we are using query, whenever we are applying a query, we must always have to understand how much records is expected. The query is returning how much record we are expecting that query would return us. So if query would return you a single record, you can definitely define a variable of that object and you can collect it inside a variable, because the capacity of a variable is to store a single record. Whereas if you would know that your query would returning you multiple records, more than one records, you always would require to define a list collection, list of that object. All right. So that was too important thing to know. I guess this much is good for now. You have few examples over here. As you can see, write an Apex program to fetch all the cases, records, and everything. So you are having few of the examples that fetch or hiring manager records, right? So go with this all. Go with this all. And there are so many examples. Oh, that's good to know. There are so many examples before I could start with the classes. So tomorrow, In the next lecture, I would be going to start with the clauses, right? I've told you that you must know, you must know all these clauses. So this is my basic query, by the way. And after this, whatever you are looking into, these are clauses where group by have implement offset for update. So we are going to start how to filter out the record based on some certain conditions, and that conditions will always be used by the clauses. So tomorrow morning, I'm going to start with clauses part, but you have so many of the things, you have so many examples what you can do by your own, right? Go with all of them. Go with all of them. All solve all these assignments and everything, whatever has been written over. All right. That's all, I guess, is sufficient for today. Let me now give you this command so that you could unmute yourself. And if you wanted to ask me anything, please go ahead now. Yes, you can unmute yourself, please. Yes, any questions? Any questions? Yes, any questions? On. You must ask something every day. Any questions? Nothing? That's really strange. Okay. All right then. Thank you so much for joining. Please do your assignments. Please solve. Because see, development is all about practice. Don't think like that. If you have understood this right now, you would going to, you know, this would this would retain forever. No, it's not possible unless you would make your own practice. So in development, the practice is very important. So it's really important to solve all of the assignments. Even more than that. Even more than that. If, for example, if I have given you 5 questions, you have to solve them all 5. But you should be in a position even to take few more examples. So development is all about practice. You won't practice, you would not going to get a grip on this, right? It's very important that you should do your practices on regular basis. Thank you so much for joining. Have a nice day.